So the purpose of this video is to show you how to use Okta's SAML integration with React, or any SAML integration for that matter. The reason that I found myself doing this is because I have an Okta dashboard and I needed to have a way where I would click the tile and it would automatically authenticate me into my website without having me log in again. So Okta does provide a SDK for React, and I'm pretty sure they have it for other JavaScript frameworks as well. But the problem with that is, even if I clicked the tile in my Okta dashboard and got redirected to my website, it would still ask me to log in again. And that's very inconvenient, and being lazy as programmers, we don't want that to happen. So in order to get single sign-on with SAML to work, which in this case would be, I go to my website, if I'm not authenticated, it redirects me to Okta, as Okta is my sign-in provider, and then once I sign in, it redirects me back with my credentials. You actually need a backend to help you do this with React, as it's very, very hard to get SAML to work with React on its own. So I'm going to show you in this video how to actually use React and then use Node.js Express backend with something called Passport. And I'm going to show you how to actually authenticate with Okta so that React detects if you're logged in or not, redirects you to Okta, and then when you get redirected back, you'll actually have those credentials that you wouldn't normally have when you're trying something like this with React. You can think of the Okta login as sort of a blanket protecting your application, but also supplying you with the information you need. So if you try and access this and you're not authenticated to Okta, you're going to get redirected to Okta every single time. And I should point out, what I mean by redirected is it actually takes you away from your website and then redirects you back with the credentials that it needs. The last thing that I should point out to you is that I am by no means a professional when it comes to integrating SAML with React. I've just found a nice little way around it, and it served my purpose, and I hope this serves your purpose as well. All right, let's get into it. All right, so if you already have a base project set up, you can skip this section, but I did set up this project at its most basic form for you if you needed a starting point. So what I have here is I have a client side and a server side. The client side is React with TypeScript, with just the application file being also serving the page. That's it. And then the server side just being Node.js, TypeScript, and Express, with a little bit of logging, setting up the body parsing, the access control, a simple route that's just a health check where you just type in hello, and some error handling. That's it. It's the most absolute basic React and Node.js projects you can make. So I'm going to start them up for you really quick too, just to show you how basic they are. So you can see here that just it renders the page and says, hello, I'm not authenticated with Okta. And then if I go to my backend, type in my hello route, you'll see that the server is running and it is returning my routes properly. So again, I don't have any fancy route setup or anything. I'm just showing you the most basic things that I can. And if you take a look at the console logging here, you'll see that the logging's working. And that's pretty much it for the base project. So if you're integrating this into your own project, as long as it looks something like this, you should be totally fine. And as long as you have inside of React, one page, serving all your routes and whatnot, this is where you're going to want to put that authentication check. Okay, let's move on to the next step. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our Okta dashboard. Now, mine may look a little bit different from yours. This dashboard actually just recently updated for me. So you just have to make sure you find wherever it is that you create a new application. So for me, on the left-hand side here, I'm going to go to the Applications tab, and I'm going to go ahead and click Add Application. After I click that, the top right, I'm going to click Create a New App, and I'm going to select SAML 2.0. Now you're going to have this little dialog here where you can edit a few things. I'm going to enter my app name. I'm going to put like React SAML integration or something like that. Here you also have the option to change your logo, upload one, check the little app visibility settings at the bottom. I'm just going to hit next. My single sign-on URL is going to actually go to my backend, which is going to be my local host at 1337. And then I'm going to do /login/callback. This is going to be a post request endpoint, and Okta is going to hit that with the proper credentials. For my audience, I'm just going to put localhost 1337. And then I'm going to leave everything else in its default format, except for the name ID format. I am going to select email address because I do want the email address returned and confirmed by Okta. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And I'm going to say this is an internal app. And then you don't have to click this option at the bottom, but I will. I'm going to finish that up. And now you're going to see this part right here that says view setup instructions. Go ahead and click that. It's going to take you to a page and it's going to have a couple URLs for you and this certificate. Make sure you keep this page open as we're going to need these URLs and the certificate for when we actually configure our server side. While we're on the server side here inside of the console, let's go ahead and run an npm install for Express, Session, Passport, and Passport SAML. And once you've done that, make sure you run an npm install -- save dev and install the types for all of the ones I just mentioned. These are the 3 extra packages we're going to need on top of already having Express in my base project. Once we've done that, we can change directory to our client, and then we can run an npm install Axios. And you don't have to install types for this because they are already installed for you automatically with the Axios package. One of the few packages that includes them for you already, which is nice. Now that we've done that, let's start off by adding 2 state variables to our application. A loading that is a bool and an email that is a string. The loading is basically just going to be for authenticating purposes, and the email is going to be for actually grabbing the email from the OKTA SAML integration on the back end. So it's going to actually, I'll have it rendering your email so you can see that we're actually pulling credentials from OKTA. Next, we're going to add a use effect. And let's go ahead and program out this use effect, and then I'll explain the workflow to you after. So first, I'm going to go ahead and put in a little logging statement here. I have a little logging library I included for you. You can use console log though if you want. And I'm just going to say, checking to see if we are authenticated with Express and OKTA or and Passport, whatever you want to put here. Next, I'm going to be making a call to Axios. And I'm going to make my method get. And the URL I'm going to be picking, it's going to be my backend. And it's going to be to localhost at 1337 as my port. And then for the route name, I'm just going to put who am I, because I want the backend to tell me who I am. I don't want to actually provide any credentials from the front end. After you put the URL, we're going to add one more statement here, and it's going to be a setting called with credentials equal to true. This is going to allow Axios to tell the backend that we do want the credentials section of this to be activated so that Passport and Express authenticate us on the back end. So it's going to be passing around our information as long as this is switched to true. And it does this by recognizing where the request is coming from. So we're actually going to be keeping track of this in the back end. Next, let's go ahead and add a response function inside of a then block. And first, I'm going to go ahead and log my response.data.user because in Axios, as long as the request returns with a 200 or a 300 or something in that range, it will always go to the then block. But if you are unauthorized, it'll go to the catch block. So here I'm expecting my response.data.user being passed in from my backend. If that exists, the response.data.user is going to have something on it called a name ID, which is actually going to hold my email. And I'm not altering the object as it's sent from Express. I'm just using the object as it is. If that doesn't work, let's go ahead and put an else block. And I'm just going to put a little placeholder here called redirect to login because I'm just going to make a function for this because I'm going to need to call it in 2 different spots. In my catch block, if there's an error, I'm going to also put here redirect to login. And you can also log the error here if you want, which is what I'm going to do. The second part I'm passing to my logging functions is actually a namespace so I can differentiate where the logging message came from. Now I can do a function called redirect to login. And all this is going to do is run a window.location.replace. And then I'm going to link it to my backend /login. So what this is going to do is check to see if I'm authenticated or not. If not, it's going to hit this function and actually redirect me to my backend. And then the backend is going to try and authenticate me with OKTA. And this is how we get around using SAML with a front end, by tricking it through the backend. Next, let's go ahead and check to see if we're loading. If we are, just return a paragraph that says you're loading with like ... Finally, we can go to the return, and it says, hello, I'm not authenticated with Okta. Change that to hello, I'm, and then pass in the email, which we'll be receiving from the backend. Lastly, replace the comments, redirect to login with the actual redirect to login function. And that should be pretty much it for the client side. That's everything we're going to need, because when we call the backend is going to be doing all the authenticating for us. I'm going to go ahead and run this npm start and just test this out really quick to see what happens. So you can see that the page is loading, and then eventually, because the backend's not even running, you're going to get some sort of error here. But you'll see at the top that we actually did redirect to our localhost 1337/login. So what's going to actually happen once we get that working is that link is going to be protected by Passport in our backend, and Passport will actually redirect us to Okta to sign in if we're not authenticated. If we are authenticated, it's actually just going to shoot us back to our front end, and we'll have the credentials when we call that who am I route a second time. Now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and move on to the backend. For the backend, let's go ahead and open up our config.ts file and start adding some configurations. So the first set of configurations here I'm going to make is going to be in a SAML code block. And inside of it, I'm going to have a few things that we're going to need for Passport. So the first thing I'm going to have is a cert, followed by an entry point, followed by an issuer, and then followed by some options. Inside of the options block, let's go ahead and put failure redirect and just have that to our login. And then we can put a setting for failure flash to be true. These are settings that are going to be used by our SAML setup. I'm going to go ahead and leave those blank for now, those other settings. And let's go ahead and create our express session settings. So below the server block, let's make a session block. And we're going to pass in a few more variables. We're going to have our resave variable equal to false. For secret, you can put anything you like. I'm just going to put super awesome secret. And then for save uninitialized, we're going to want to make that equal to true so that it saves you the first time that you try and log in. Now for the cert, we're going to go ahead and make that equal to our source config folder. And then we're going to have it linking to the saml.pem file, which we haven't created yet. Now, when you run an npm build on this directory is going to change to your source. Instead of source config SAML, it'll be something like build config SAML. So make sure that you have this variable updated when you run a build. For our issuer, we're going to go ahead and just put our HTTP localhost like we did inside of our Okta config. Now for our entry point, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to copy that first link on this page that I told you to save. And that's going to be the actual entry point link that our SAML authentication is going to use. And now that we have all these settings done, let's go ahead and create a new file called saml.pem. And then you're just going to go ahead and copy and paste that x.509 certificate into here. And that's all you need for the saml.pem file. So that's all taken care of too. I haven't checked if you needed the permission set properly or not, but if you do have to change the permissions on it, just make sure you chmod it to either 600 or 400. As far as the configuration goes, that's pretty much all we need for that. So now we can go ahead and set up our Passport library configuration. So again, Passport is what's going to help us with the SAML authentication. So inside of our config folder, go ahead and make a new file called passport.ts. Inside of that, we're going to throw in some imports at the top. We're going to start by importing fs from fs. We're going to import passport from passport. We're going to import a module strategy from our passport-SAML. We're going to import our config from our config file. And we're going to import the logging from our logging file. Again, I'm using a logging library that I created. You can use console.log. Now, we're going to have a variable called saved users, and it's going to be an array of express.users. The reason we're using the express.user interface is because that's what's provided to us by Express Session. We're going to go ahead and passport.serializeUser. We're going to define the serializeUser function. We're going to pass in express.user into the chevrons. This returns a callback with our express user and a done function. Inside of it, I'm just going to log the express user that's being serialized. And then I'm going to call the done function by passing in null and then the express user itself. Next, I'm going to copy and paste this, and we're going to use this for our deserialized user because it's going to look exactly the same. We're going to pass deserialized user into the comment and change the function to match it accordingly. Now, deserialize and deserialize is what helps Passport and our Express backend take care of the variables that are being passed around when your browser is authenticating with the backend. This is also what we're going to be using to extract our email later in the function. Now we're going to do a passport.use, and we're going to be passing in a new strategy. Inside of that strategy, we're going to have an object block that's going to pass in some options. Those options are going to be our issuer, which is just going to be our config.saml.issuer. We're going to pass in our protocol, which is just going to be HTTP, ://. This would be HTTPS if you do have SSL enabled. Our path is going to be our /login/callback. That's what Okta is going to hit when it authenticates us. Our entry point is going to be our config.saml.entry point. And then our cert is going to be an fs.readFileSync. And then we're going to pass in the cert. And it's going to be of the UTF-8 encoding. Once we're finished with that, pass in a callback function. Inside of it, we're going to have our Express user and done. However, since we're using TypeScript, we're going to have to attach the any interface into this in order to get it to work properly. Check the save users array to see if it includes the Express user, and if it doesn't, push them into this array. So now if the user is inside of this array, we're going to know that they're authenticated and we don't have to keep redirecting them to Okta. After that, go ahead and return done, once again by passing in null and our Express user. So that's pretty much all we need for our Passport authentication. Once you're done this, go ahead and open your server.ts file, and we're going to go ahead and just import our config/passport at the top. We don't actually have to import it as a module. We just want to import the file itself, so Passport initializes everything we just wrote. Next, at the top of our server file, we can import session from Express session. And we can go ahead and import Passport from Passport. Now we're just going to add a few extra things inside of the server file in order to hook up the integration fully. So where I parse the body of the request, let's go ahead and add a few more things here. I'm going to type in a router.use session, and inside of the session pass in the config.session. Then I'm going to use a router use, and I'm going to do a passport.initialize and a passport.session. Next, inside of the rules of our API, we have to actually add one more rule to allow us to pass the with credentials from our client side. So what we're going to do is do an access control allow credentials and have that equal to true. That way we can pass the credentials back and forth. Now we're going to add a couple of routes to finish off the Okta integration. So the first route that we're going to add is a router.get. The path is going to be login. We're going to add our passport.authenticate middleware. The type is going to be a string that says SAML, and we're going to pass in our config.saml.options. Then we're going to have a callback function with our request, response, and next functions. Inside of it, we're just going to go ahead and redirect the user back to our front end, or back to the client side, which is going to be a response.redirect to our localhost 3000. The reason that we're doing this here is that if they get by the Passport authentication, we know they're authenticated, and then we can just return them back to the front end. Now, when they get returned back to the front end, it's actually going to call that whoami route we're about to write and actually pass the credentials to them. But before we do that, we're going to copy and paste our login, and we're going to change it to a login./callback. And this is actually going to be a router.post function. So this is what Okta is going to call to help log us in. So if we're not authenticated with Okta, then this route will be used when Okta does sign us in. Last but not least, we can do our router.get /whoami, and then we can have our callback function. And right here, we can check that if our request.is authenticated is false, so that with the exclamation mark there, we're just going to go ahead and return. You can return a 401 unauthorized or a 404 or whatever you want here, but I'm going to do a 401. And I'm going to go ahead and log first that the user is not authenticated. I'm going to pass into my response that a message may be saying unauthorized. You don't actually have to return any JSON here, as long as you have it returning the 401. So Axios knows to boot it to the login page. If we are authenticated, let's go ahead and log it and say that the user is authenticated. And maybe we can log the user as well. And then we can return a status of 200, and we can return our user inside of a JSON return. So that pretty much does it for the server side. There is one more thing I do want to take a look at, and that is making sure that you have a user assigned. So make sure that inside of your Okta application, when you go to your actual application, if you go to the Sign On tab, make sure that you've actually assigned this to somebody inside of your Okta organization, or they won't be able to log into the page. So now that we have everything running, it's time to test. Let's go ahead and start our client and our server. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a blank page here in a private browser, and I'm going to make sure my logging is persistent. And the reason that I'm doing this is just so we can see everything happen from beginning to end. So let's go ahead and type in localhost 3000 and let's see what happens. So right away, you'll notice that in the URL address above, it happened pretty quick, but we got redirected to our backend, and now we're actually redirected to our Okta entry point. So we're going to go ahead and log in with one of our assigned users. And once I hit sign in, what should happen is it should post to the login callback, and then that will in turn return us to our front end. And then our front end should call the who am I one more time. And when it does that, we should actually get a nice little object with our user information inside of it. Now you can see that it navigated us to that login callback, and we got our who am I called one more time. We actually got a response this time with all our user information. And you can see inside of the main page, it says, hello, I'm, and then the email I entered for my Okta user. And also you can see here in the console side, everything that was logged. You can see how everything works in order to better understand the SAML integration and how I've done it. Again, I'm not a professional, but this was the easiest way. And by easiest, I mean insanely hard to actually get working. But once you get this working the first time, you don't ever have to do it again. And it looks like that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. This one hit close to home, as this was an issue I was trying to solve using Okta's React library. And I was trying all sorts of different login methods, but the support for it just wasn't there. And I figured that if I could get the SAML login to work with Okta, you get it to work anywhere. So there you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.